Chapter 5. Going to the Chapel. If any of our parents had noticed Nelson and Belinda had gone swimming, they made no mention of it before the evening ended. After Belinda came downstairs, she and Nelson were hungry again, probably from their frolicking in the water, and they had dessert and coffee. I just had some coffee. Nelson and I did most of the talking, discussing politics, Cape Cod, and business. There was no music after dinner, no entertainment this time, so after we were finished, Colonel Childs declared it was time for him and his family to go. Nelson had to go back to law school early in the morning. At the door, Nelson told Belinda and me he would have to look in on us when he returned. Daddy gazed at me with some excitement in his eyes, but I shook my head. After Mother went upstairs with Belinda, Daddy pulled me aside in his office. "Well, how did they get along?" he asked. I thought for a moment, then flopped into his leather chair adjacent to his desk. "Dreadfully, as I expected," I said. "She made a fool of herself as usual." "What?" Daddy sat back in his desk. "What happened?" "They seemed to be getting along so well at dinner. She wanted to go for a walk on the beach, but she had something else up her sleeve, Daddy. She pulled off her clothes and challenged him to go swimming with her." "Pulled off her clothes?" I was so embarrassed I thought I would die. "Oh no," Daddy said, his face losing his robust color. "Oh yes. I kept trying to get her to behave, but it was no use. Belinda will always be Belinda, Daddy. We might as well accept it." He nodded sadly. "Well, I tried. I had an idea and I tried." He looked up at me, his eyes glassy. "I'm tired. Let's get some sleep," he said. "Don't worry, Daddy. You'll figure something out yet," I said. He smiled quickly and patted me on the shoulder. Right, he said. "As I suspected, Nelson Childs is looking for a woman of some substance," I added and left the office. "Belinda just isn't right for him." "I see," Daddy muttered behind me, but he never suggested or assumed Nelson would be a good prospect for me. His attention was committed solely to Belinda as usual. "However, I'm not about to give up. I have something else up my sleeve," Daddy said. I turned on the stairway. "What?" "Give me a few days to work out the details," he said cryptically. I thought he meant he was going to come up with some other approach to getting Belinda and Nelson Childs together, but he had an entirely different prospect lined up, and this one, in his terms, more sensible from a business standpoint. Also, he thought it might help if we had one of our formal family meetings, as he proposed the idea to Belinda himself, "so we can avoid any further misunderstandings and bad behavior," he explained, when 3 days later he announced his decision to have the meeting. "You might as well wish for the whole world, Daddy, if you're going to wish for no further bad behavior from Belinda." We'll see," he said, his eyes firm with determination. From time to time, Daddy held these sessions to talk about our family, our business, our home, and our lives. Mother even kept notes, as he wished, so he could look at her when he wanted to refer to something he had previously announced or asked. The journal she kept was our family history. As far as he was concerned, Mother entered all our important dates in it: birthdays, confirmations, vaccinations. Keeping a record of our lives was something important to Daddy. I finally decided I had better have a conversation with Belinda about Nelson Childs, just to see if we had hopes for her being romantically involved with him. Nelson hadn't called or returned as he promised, but trying to figure out what Belinda was thinking at any particular time was like trying to harness the wind. I went into her room and brought the subject up when we were getting ready for bed. Nelson, she said, tossing her name as if she'd known him intimately for years. Hardly. She gazed dreamily at herself in the mirror, fluffed her hair, and with a painful grimace studied a pale blemish on her chin. Yes, Nelson Childs. I don't think about him much, she said with annoyance. I don't think he would be that much fun. What do you mean? I was still suspicious. She could easily have contacted him without my knowing. You sure enjoyed yourself with him at dinner the other night, getting down to your underwear and swimming in the moonlight. Oh, that? Big deal, she said. She turned to me. It's not the first time I've done something like that. It seemed like fun and he wanted to do it. Why don't you think about him now then? He's too career-minded. All he talked about when you left was to get our towels was his school and plans for being a successful politician. He thinks he's going to be the president of the United States someday. I thought he could be a little boring and I told him so, she added. Just like he was with you when we had our chocolate cake, remember? I was astounded. With as much concern as she might have for throwing away an old magazine, she could have cast off a catch as good as Nelson Childs. And because he was boring? Nelson Childs could never be boring, I thought. She was the one who was boring. Let me understand this. On the beach after you two had gone swimming, you told him you thought he was boring? Yes, I did. And what did he do? He just laughed. He laughed at everything I said and did. So you see, I'm sure he doesn't think all that much of me. He hasn't called me, has he? You mailed his underwear to his school and he didn't even call to thank you, did he? She was right about that. I was very disappointed he hadn't responded. I had taken great pains to pack the garments so no one would ask any embarrassing questions. Frankly, I don't care if he does call or come around again. I don't want to think about him. Fine, I told her, don't think about him. She turned from the mirror. Why are you getting so angry about it? She stared at me a moment, then smiled. You like him, don't you, Olivia? She said. You finally fell in love with someone? That's not true. Yes, it's true. Sure, it's true. My sister is in love, she declared to the mirror image as if it proved I was just like her. Do you dream of him? Fantasize about being with him? Why don't you call him? Why don't you go visit him at his school? She asked, still looking at herself. It was as if she were talking to herself. You don't chase other men like that. After men like that, Belinda, I snapped. And I didn't say I was in love with him. You did. You are, she said confidently and turned back to me. So what? Why hide it? I never do when I fall in love. And why can't you chase after a man? What makes them so special? It's not that they're special. We're special. That's why we shouldn't act so desperate. I swear, talking to you is like talking to a 4-year-old sometimes. Don't get upset with me just because I know you have a crush on Nelson Childs. I don't, I screamed. Yes, you do. I might just tell him myself one day. If you do anything like that, Belinda Gordon, I'll personally rip out your tongue, I threatened. She smiled impishly, her eyes full of glee. Belinda, I'm warning you. Okay, she said. But she didn't stop teasing me for days, doing things like pretending at the office that Nelson was on the phone or writing NC on my notepads. No matter how I swore or glared at her, she simply laughed. The little general's in love, she sang. I told Daddy about her antics at the office, but he didn't chastise her. Instead, he bought her a songbird in a gilded cage. She had wanted one for some time. It seemed that no matter what she did or how she behaved, Daddy always rained gifts on her. whereas he simply gave me a substantial salary. His justification was that I could buy myself whatever I wanted. Belinda couldn't. But whose fault was that, if not her own? I knew Daddy had an ulterior motive when he bought her the bird, but I predicted the bird would either starve to death or die from some other form of neglect. It will not, Belinda resorted. It'll be very happy living in my room, a room full of sunshine even on a rainy day. Won't it, Mommy? Yes, dear, Mother replied like some wound-up toy whose button had been pressed. Nevertheless, Belinda had to be reminded to clean out the cage, feed the bird every day thereafter, finally complaining and asking why the maid couldn't do it, as well as everything else. The following Tuesday night, Daddy declared we would have a family meeting after dinner, and there was important things to discuss. Oh, not another one of those dreadful meetings, Belinda cried at the dinner table. I didn't do anything wrong, Daddy. Did someone say I did? She asked, glaring my way. It's not anyone's doing anything wrong, he said. Did we spend too much on clothes again? She asked, looking to Mother. From Daddy's expression, I could see he knew nothing about that. Let's just wait until after dinner, Belinda, Mother replied quickly. Whatever she had spent on Belinda, she didn't want Daddy thinking about it now. It's better for the digestion if we don't discuss heavy matters while we eat. Why do we have to discuss any heavy matters at all? She whined. Men like to discuss heavy matters, but women shouldn't have to. That's a ridiculous thing to say. Women aren't any less intelligent, Belinda. In many cases, they're more intelligent, I told her. Who wants to be more intelligent? She muttered. Belinda pouted and deliberately only nibbled on her food, but I was intrigued. Daddy hadn't yet told me the details of what we were going to discuss. Daddy had kept his plan to himself. We gathered in his den office as usual. Belinda and I seated on the red leather settee, and Mother in the leather chair and to Daddy's right, her notebook open and pen in hand writing. You have today's date, he asked her. Yes, Winston. Good. Then we'll bring the meeting to order. All of us understand that it becomes necessary from time to time to make some sacrifices, to make some efforts for the good of the family, he began. I hate it when he says that, Belinda muttered. It usually means he wants us to do something hard. Shh, dear, Mother said. She remained poised to write down the important words. Just like the days of old when kings and queens throughout the gaining power and wealth would think hard about marriages of their children and marriages that could benefit the family, the kingdom, he continued. Belinda, he continued, turning to her. You know Carson McGill, Daniel McGill's son, the one who went to the private school? I know you do, because he's spoken to you a few times just recently, hasn't he? Belinda shot a glance at me, then looked at Daddy. I didn't do anything bad with him, Daddy. He's just offered to buy me something cold to drink, and then we went for a walk on the dock. Apparently he was quite taken with you. He came to my office a few days to speak about you. Daddy continued. Neither I nor Belinda had seen Carson there. I looked up skeptically at Daddy, but he ignored my expression. A fine young man, outstanding, proper. He asked me if he could ask you for your hand in marriage, Daddy added quickly. What? Belinda said. He wants to marry you, I translated. She sat there with her mouth open. Carson McGill wants to marry me, she said. She was about to laugh, but Daddy scowled. Yes, and I thought it would be a fine match. He's going to inherit his father's cannery business, and we're talking about a merger with one of our enterprises. Belinda looked at me again, this time with for some support, but I stared at her without much expression and certainly no sympathy. I'm not in love with Carson McGill, and even if I was, I'm not ready to marry anyone, she said. Why not, Daddy demanded. I'm just not. Of course you are. You're an attractive young lady, and you'll satisfy any good man. Olivia's not even engaged, she pointed out quickly. Olivia's developing a career at the moment. She'll be right behind you, I'm sure, Daddy insisted. He gazed at me and then quickly shifted his eyes back to Belinda. The young man will court you, Daddy followed with those eyes of intimidation, his shoulders rising. Court me? Romance you, I said with a small smile. Get you to fall in love with him. That's exactly right, and you'll fall in love with him, I'm sure, Daddy insisted. How could you not? He's good looking and very intelligent. He'll make you a devoted husband. Belinda looked totally confused, and I was enjoying every moment of it. It's the best thing that could happen to you, my dear, and it will help the family a great deal. Does everyone agree? He looked at Mother. Yes, she said. I think it would be fine for Belinda to get married. So do I chimed. Belinda looked like she had been struck in the head. She gazed at Mother and Daddy, and then at me, before looking down, a strange smile on her face. I don't know the first thing about being a wife, she said. I can't cook, sew, clean, keep books. I don't have any patience for children. Really, I said. That's not really too bad, considering you almost had one. There was a dead silence. We're not supposed to talk about that, she finally said. So don't, I followed. Mother, you can put down that I agreed with Daddy. Carson McGill would make a great husband for Belinda. Belinda, will you agree to let him court you, Daddy asked. Belinda looked at the ceiling and sighed. I suppose, she said. But if he doesn't like me, don't blame me, she added. Then it's settled, Daddy said. I'll get back to him, and he'll call you. He's a fine young man, distinguishing himself in the business. Don't throw away a good opportunity for yourself, Daddy warned. We could have an old-fashioned sort of wedding, a ceremony behind the house, couldn't we, Mother asked. I don't see why not, Daddy said. Why don't you work up the preliminary guest list, dear? As the time grows closer, we'll review it. How can you plan my wedding? I didn't fall in love yet, Belinda exclaimed. To be honest, Belinda, love is something that happens after the wedding. Real love, that is, Daddy said. Just keep thinking of what you can do for the family, and you'll see. It'll all work out for the best. He clapped his hands and declared the meeting over. Belinda was numbed by Daddy's announcement. A part of her wanted to be outraged by the indignant that such an important aspect of her life would be dictated to her. But then there was that vain face smiling back at her from her mirrors, fanning the fumes of her ego by convincing her that she was so worthwhile a catch, men would come to her father to plead for a chance to get her to fall in love with them. I realized quickly that she saw it as a form of an audition. If Carson didn't work out, there would be soon someone else knocking on the door. I really feel bad that Daddy expects I will marry before you do, Olivia, she told me that night. It's almost as if my beauty is a curse, I suppose. That's all right, I said, swallowing back my laughter. I'll survive. Carson has become a very nice-looking young man. Have you seen him recently, she asked. No, but I don't get out as much as you do, Belinda. If you say he's good-looking, I'm sure he is. Daddy's so worried about me, she muttered. She thought for a moment. I'll try to see what happens, she concluded with a sigh so deep I thought she would deflate and collapse. Do that, I thought. Do that, I said. Satisfied now that she was dating Carson because she wanted to, Belinda welcomed him warmly. when he came courting. Carson was an only child, spoiled and protected from the day he was born. His parents decided that he would attend private schools from kindergarten so he knew few of the young people in the community. I had met him on 2 different occasions and found him stuffy and conceited. The second time I met him, I told Mother I thought he had been brought up by a textbook. Everything he wore had to match perfectly. He was nearly the diametric opposite of Belinda, which made the prospect of such a union even more amusing to me. But Belinda enjoyed being the center of everyone's attention now. She enjoyed leading Carson around on an invisible leash. She was even more flamboyant than usual when she was brought to restaurants or gala affairs in his Rolls Royce. Now that she was being courted by such a gallant prospect, she insisted she needed more expensive clothing and real jewelry. Belinda and Mother went on one of Belinda's frequent shopping sprees to Boston so she could get just the right thing to wear for some event Carson was taking her to. From what I could see, Carson was dazzled by her. Belinda saw where and how she could take advantage of him, and soon was treating him more like a golden retriever, sending him on errands, having him fetch this and that, making him jump with a look or a gesture. And when he asked her to marry him, giving her a diamond ring big enough to pop eyes, she waved it like a flag, never sitting without pressing her palm to her cheek so that the ring was obvious to everyone around her. Mother began to plan the wedding. As for Belinda, she surprised me by her apparent enjoyment in every aspect. The announcements, the social columns, the invitations to the formal dinners. "I'm finally respectable," she told me one night, "and you thought I would never be." She laughed and went off to prepare to go to dinner with Carson. However, something gnawed at the walls of my complacency until suspicions began to slip out and trickle into my imagination. I watched Belinda and Carson together more closely. Yes, he doted on her, but Belinda usually got bored with someone like this quickly, I thought. She was tolerating him more than I would have expected. She was being too cooperative for Daddy. Something the little voice inside me warned was amiss. The truth was, I often gazed at her and Carson and thought to myself she could devour him in minutes. She teased him often. She made him do silly things. She laughed at the things he said, and whenever she kissed him or stroked him with affection, it resembled the affection a sister might give a brother. Certainly they had not reached the stage of love Belinda was accustomed to in reaching a relationship, I thought. I doubted that they had been in bed. And when I asked her about it, she laughed and told me Carson believes a man and woman shouldn't sleep together till they're married. "And what did you say to that?" I asked. "I told him that was what I believed," she said. "So he believes you're a virgin." "Olivia, of course he does. Why shouldn't he?" "Why shouldn't he?" I thought. "I'm sure your name is on the bathroom walls, dear sister. What about your old boyfriends? And the one who made you pregnant? Carson didn't know any of these boys, of course. And if he heard them say anything about Belinda, he wouldn't believe it anyway," I thought. "And for that matter, he wouldn't frequent the places where Belinda's name could be written on the bathroom walls. Everyone, I concluded, chooses his or her own version of the truth to fit their own image of how things should be. The only reality was the reality we accepted. Despite this explanation for Carson's behavior, it still didn't satisfy my musings concerning Belinda. The wedding was planned for the spring. Not a day went by now that Mother didn't consider, discuss, or investigate some aspect of the affair. The event took over our daily lives and became the sole subject of conversation at dinner and Daddy's family meetings. Despite all this, all the reasons why Belinda should be and apparently was very happy, I remained skeptical. Her tolerance of Carson continued to bother me. This was the longest she had been with any one man, especially one who wasn't her lover. Then her social life was in a whirlwind of activity. There wasn't an event or an affair that Carson didn't propose they attend. Daddy was never as happy, and Mother was very relaxed as well. "Ain't it grand?" Daddy said one day. "A year ago we thought she was going to be a lifelong disaster. Now she's getting to be a real Cape Cod lady, huh?" "Yes, Daddy," I said. "I hope so." "Don't be so dark, Olivia. When things are planned as well as this, they usually work out. Just do your homework," he instructed. I smiled and nodded. I was still awake when Carson brought Belinda home from the charity affair in North Truro. Daddy said Mother had gone to bed because she wasn't feeling well. I heard Carson's Rolls Royce pull up and heard Belinda get out to be escorted to the front door. I poked my head out as she was passing. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I have a bad stomachache," she said. "Cramps. My period's coming. And besides, they are just making speeches. I fell asleep twice. I'm so tired, I'm going to sleep." I nodded, the typical Belinda answer, and watched her go into her room. As I was getting ready for bed and I drew the covers up to my chin, I heard the floor creak outside my door. And then distinctly heard someone going down the stairs. Curious, I rose and peered out just in time to see the top of Belinda's head disappear below the steps. I went downstairs to follow her, but when I did, she was nowhere to be found. In fact, the lights were off in the kitchen. However, I noticed the rear door was slightly open. When I caught sight of her, she was practically running. Why was she going there at this time of night? I wondered. She was going towards the beach, toward our beach house. I went back to the foyer at the front entrance and got one of my jackets out of the closet. The night sky was streaked with thin veil-like clouds, but the half moon was bright enough to give an illumination on the ocean. About a dozen yards from the boathouse, I thought I heard some laughter. As I drew closer and listened harder, I heard a male's voice laughing. For a moment I could barely breathe. I sucked in some air and stepped up to the window. At first I saw nothing. Then I spotted them on the floor because of the glow in the small lantern. I pulled back, feeling as if I had been punched in the stomach. No, I thought, it can't be. How can it be? It's a dream. No, I thought, it can't be. It's a dream. I closed my eyes and then opened them again, and hoping I'd be back in my bed. Of course I wasn't. I was there beside the window. Slowly I peered through the corner of the window again. He opened his eyes, and I was sure by his expression he saw me looking in the window. I didn't wait to hear him cry out. I turned and ran all the way back to the house, coughing and sputtering when I reached the wooden steps up to the yard. I was dry heaving. My stomach felt like it had been turned inside out. Then I looked back because I heard the sound of the door of the boathouse being opened. "Nelson," I heard her cry, "come back. Come on, there's no one there. I don't have all night." "All right," he said, and lingered a moment, then returned to the office. I took 2 deep breaths and held my hand to my heart to stop it from pounding a hole in my chest. I made my way to the front and hung up my coat and returned to my room. I pulled off my nightgown and went to the bathroom and to the shower. I put on a different nightgown and crawled back into bed. My heart thumped dully. I had indeed seen them in the boathouse. This was no dream, no nightmare of my own making. In 2 months, I thought, she was supposed to be married to Carson in a ceremony that would take place only yards from where she lay making love with the only man I loved. I heard Belinda return to her room, but I didn't get up to confront her. Instead, I pretended like I knew nothing. She rattled on and on with Mother about how boring the event had been last night. "I never heard you come in," Mother told her. "Did you hear her, Olivia?" I looked at Belinda. "Yes, I heard her come in," I said quickly. "I have to get to work. We're having a big day today." When I turned down Commercial Street, I saw Nelson Childs and his father come out of the Sea Loft, a popular breakfast place. They shook hands and Nelson started towards his shiny red car. Impulsively, I turned in the space right behind his car and looked up, surprised. When he saw me, his smile of confusion faded, and his face turned deathly serious. Then he caught his thoughts in mid-air, flung them in the back of his mind, and smiled again, his hand up in a greeting. I rolled down the window. "Good morning," he said. "I just had breakfast with Dad." I could see from how nervous he was he'd expect I'd seen him. "About last night," I said firmly. His lips quivered, his eyes filled with trepidation. "Last night? Why don't you just get in my car?" I suggested. He nodded and I waited for him to get in. I heard Belinda leave the house after she came home with Carson. I was curious, so I followed her to the boathouse. "Oh," he said, looking ahead. "I thought it was you. I'm disappointed in you, Nelson. You know you're having an affair with a woman who's engaged." She's my sister and I love her, but I recognize her failings. She's not sophisticated when it comes to male-female relationships. I don't mean that she's not a good lover. I'm sure she is quite the lover, but she's been in trouble before, bad trouble. And you have no idea how bad. I continued, relentless now. I won't let it happen again. I spun on him. I would personally expose both of you. You might as well pack your bags and take the next tugboat out of here, Nelson Childs. You talk about becoming an elected official on what, a big scandal? Olivia, please, he looked down. I don't even want to try to defend myself. You're right, you're absolutely right. I let my hormones take control. It would destroy both our families. I can expect something like this for Belinda. In fact, I was anticipating it. But to discover that you were involved, I never could have thought it, Nelson. I'm so disappointed. He nodded. I'm disappointed in myself, too. He turned to me, his eyes wet and his lips firm. You really have no reason to believe me, Olivia, but I swear I won't disappoint you again, he said. I turned away and stared out the window, my heart pounding. How handsome he is, I thought. How much I wished he would embrace me and want me and risk all for me as he had with Belinda. Well, I want to have faith in you, Nelson, I said. Thank you, he replied. I have a great deal of respect for you, Olivia. It's important that I don't lose that respect. I gazed at him. Why couldn't he think more between us than mere respect? People earn each other's respect, I said. That's right. I held his gaze for a moment, then he looked ahead. This'll just be between us. Thank you, Olivia. You won't be disappointed in me, he promised. I nodded. I was very disappointed already, but I didn't know how to express why. I started my car engine. I gotta go back to school, he said. Have a great week. You too, I said without looking at him. Bye. I watched him get out of the car. He turned and smiled and waved, and I pulled away, my heart heavy. Two weeks later, Daddy came into my office at work to tell me that he just heard Nelson Childs had become engaged to a woman from a prominent Boston family.